Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third webinar in the Fall 2025 series presented by Newton Conservators. My name's Beth Wilkinson, and I will be your host for this evening. Barbara Bates is our technical host. As most of you know, Newton Conservators is an all-volunteer nonprofit established way back in 1961. Newton Conservators is grateful for the beauty and sustenance that the land provides for humans and the other creatures with whom we share this earth. Our goals of preserving open space and connecting people to nature require challenging the ways in which land conservation has historically excluded some peoples from protected land. Newton Conservators commits to acknowledging this exclusionary history and to building active partnerships with groups who have been hurt by that history, starting but not ending with Indigenous peoples such as the Massachusetts. As naturalist Aldo Leopold wrote, "When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect." We are very fortunate to have Dave Small here tonight to teach us about attracting and watching moths in our own yards. He'll tell us which plants we should introduce and how and what we can do to view moths on a summer evening. Dave retired in 2013 after 35 years with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where he served as Assistant Regional Director at the DCR Quabbin Reservoir. His dedication to conservation and natural history continues at Mount Grace as he leads a team tasked with protecting the landscape he loves. Welcome, Dave.
Well, welcome everybody to Discovering Moths. Welcome to the dark side. The natural history journeys for many of us started with birds, and that was my case in 1964. My 8th grade science teacher, Bob Coyle, taught us quite a bit about natural history, and birds was one of the big things that he emphasized. And I've been a bird watcher ever since. And we also did astronomy and geology and a few other things too, but birds are what really stuck with me all these years. It was a good start, and I still do a lot of birding to this day. But as I grew older, I've been doing this since high school, but I started to be interested in other forms of life and became pretty proficient at butterflies, dragonflies, herps, and other things. And I've developed becoming a pretty all-round naturalist. And I do this all year round and with all different taxa, and it's just a great hobby to be out and just experiencing our native wildlife in its many forms. So we get to moths. Most people think of moths as being kind of like a bad thing. Most of us, our early recognition of moths is really things of, the moths that ate holes in my sweater, the moths that are in the meal in your pantry, and so things like the meal moth and what we now call, I should change this, the gypsy moth, which is now called spongy moth. I remember back in the 80s when, total defoliation of all the trees in June, midsummer, was just really devastating. So we got a lot of bad images of moths overall. And I'm here to say that they're not all bad. Here's a Luna moth in my backyard and my wall, and there's just nothing more spectacular than some of these large, silk moths. And when I talk to people about learning about moths, I kind of tend to tell them to start with the biggest moths first and work your way down. And we'll do some of that as we explore through the evening. Most of us are familiar with the giant silk moths like Polyphemus and the Promethea, and they're pretty spectacular beasts. And we still get quite a few of these all through the summer, and it's just a great thing to find for sure. But there are smaller silk moths that are not quite as well known, like the rosy maple moth on the left and the pink striped oakworm on the right. And these also are silk moths, and most of these moths do not feed as adults. They do all their eating as caterpillars, and by the time they come to adulthood, they mostly just have sex and die, and that's the way they live. But they're just gorgeous when they're here. So Lepidoptera means scaled wings. And if you take a heavy duty microscope and look at the scales, it's really pretty spectacular. The variation in the scales and how they develop over time. And they all have different uses for attracting mates or other signals to protect them from predators and such. So what's the difference between a butterfly and a moth? And actually, when you think about it, it's really a human construct. Um, the moths don't know they're not butterflies and vice versa. So we've come up with a system um, of taxonomy that that identifies moths and butterflies differently. And right now, for taxonomy reasons, we separate the moths and dragonflies, moths and butterflies by their antenna. And if we look at a butterfly, you'll see that it has um, a clubbed antenna, where moths have either a spiked antenna with no club or a feathery antenna that actually is used to as a receptor for pheromones and other signals. So the different antenna, the feathery antenna up here in the upper left is often in a male moth, and that's the receptor that's receiving information from females that are sending out a chemical pheromone to attract a mate. Um, the other antenna we see here on the bottom left is again one that has no club at the end, and the little skipper butterfly here on the right does have that clubbed antenna. And oddly enough, when you look at a list of a taxonomist list of all the Lepidoptera north of Mexico, the butterflies actually are in the middle, and they're not older or newer. They're right in the very center. So this is very much a human construct. And again, the Lepidoptera don't know they're a moth or a butterfly, but we have to do something to help this differentiate these different groups and to help us understand them better. So it's a useful tool for us just to keep our heads straight. So what good are moths anyway? So those of us who've been bird watchers for a long time really appreciate those early spring days when the warblers are up in the treetops and particularly in the oak trees as they're migrating north. And these songbirds that are heading from South America or Central America heading north, they're coming and hoping that when they get here that these moths, the caterpillars, will be hatching. And that's one of the concerns that we have is that the timing of these migrations with the emergence of caterpillars can get messed up with our different really warm springs sometimes, or the caterpillars emerge early, or maybe they're a little bit held up with a cold spring. But what is it that these birds are actually looking at? And it's these guys. These are a couple of caterpillars. If they're very much looking like sticks. Several of these will actually overwinter as caterpillars, but they come out as soon as those buds start to break, and they feed on the new buds that are emerging on the various tree species that are out there. These photos are from Sam Jaffe of the Caterpillar Lab, and he's done a lot of work on really looking at how these different moths and these caterpillars, what their food plants are and how they evolve, and what their role in the ecosystem is. But in reality, these moths are the the workhorse of the natural world, where they actually take the sun's um, uh, energy that gets put into the plants through um, photosynthesis, and they turn that energy into protein. And the protein is used by many, many species to develop. So even though we like to attract all these moths, you have to realize that the moths are actually a big key to the food sources for all the native birds and other animals that are in our natural landscape. So they play a big role. And they're pretty sharp looking themselves. If you These are some from my summer garden, and the speared dagger moth below and the goldenrod hooded owlet above. But these are readily found during the summer in a relatively um, prolific kind of landscape that has a lot of different native plant material. So we find a lot of these out there, and there's a wide variety of shapes and colors and sizes and different mechanisms to keep them from being eaten by other organisms. So attracting moths, the whole lot have been done about attracting moths. Quite often we use lights, and I'll go into that with some more depth. Both black lights and high intensity mercury vapor lamps. We sometimes use bait, and I'll talk a little more about bait, but it's some combination of beer, brown sugar, rotten fruit, maybe some rum. If there's no such thing as extra rum, I've heard, but anyway, we do that, and then we just need a few things like a headlamp or flashlight and a camera, and there we go. So if you're just going to start off, you can actually do some real neat things without spending any money or much money, just by changing the light bulb in your porch light from an incandescent lamp to a black light bulb that you can get at any retail store, hardware store for about $5 or $6, and it'll greatly attract the different species of moths that you may already have in your neighborhood or in your yard. I also use these larger black lights. These are 2-foot black lights that are again available at most hardware stores or retail shops. These run about $10 to $15 a piece, and they also provide a pretty good um, different rays of color for attracting different moths. And I'll go into more about the different types of lights as we progress. The light that I have the most luck with I use all the most of the time when I'm trying to study moths. This is a mercury vapor bulb. We do suggest that you use eye protection with these, and even any of these other lights. That if you're going to be out there for any length of time, you really should be using UV glasses to help you out and keep your eyes protected. But you can see the number of moths being attracted on this wall, from Luna moths to tons of little guys. I even think in one of these pictures I got some spring peepers and other things that are out here for the free lunch program. But the mercury vapor bulb is a very um, sophisticated, wide-ranging spectrum of light, and that's really why it does so well. And all these different bulbs have different spectrums of light that are attractive to different species of moths, beetles, fireflies, and other things. So it's a whole uh, array of things that are actually attracting the moths to the light. So different lights attract different things. So that's why we're using different types of light throughout the yard. New on the market are LED lights. These are actually European, and maybe if Santa's good, I might get a pair of these for this winter. But these can work off of uh, a, a cell phone battery or whatever. They're very low energy. You can travel with them. I've had the pleasure of going to Belize and Mexico and a few other places and looking at moths, and this would have been great to have some of these really small, packable lights available to travel with. I have friends that are using these, and they're so far everybody seems to be pretty happy with their ability to attract insects. And even on a regular battery pack, they'll run 6 to 8 hours on a charge. So they're very low voltage and low use of energy. So we talk a lot about lights, and I just want to make a little bit of a note that um, we are concerned about light pollution and dark skies. And I did listen to Dr. Avalon very recently, and it really is an issue with us having so much ambient light in our planet now, in our cities and our neighborhoods, that we really need to be thinking about managing light. Um, the fact that we do some limited lighting to attract moths, as a uh, an exercise and learning more about them, we want to pretty much make sure that we only have these lights on when we're actually actively looking at moths and working with them. Um, I make sure that I turn off my lights way before dawn, as the give the moths a chance to disperse. I learned this by watching young chipping sparrows being taught by their parents how to be on the patio floor and jumping up and picking moths off my wall. And I realized that I really got to turn those lights off early to get them to get the moths a chance to move on. So, but the real issue is not these individual um, working lights that we're doing here, but it's like all the time, everywhere you go, every gas station, every street light. Um, we really have a tremendous amount of extra light in the atmosphere these days, and it's changing um, the way insects behave. And some of the things that Dr. Owen was talking about was actually that um, some of these insects are actually not being as attractive to the lights as they used to be, and they've been doing some work with that, and actually um, some of the concerns that some of us have with how many moths are being attracted to the light may be a factor that the moths are actually not being as attractive to these lights because of all the extra light in the atmosphere. So it's kind of like, there's some disorientation. There's some basically um, just kind of a there's just too much light in the air, and and it just these single bulbs don't attract as much as they used to. Um, One of the things I did learn from this is actually some of the fireflies with all this artificial light are actually being able to make a brighter um, firefly, you know, signal in their abdomen, and it's just so they can be seen better in these unnatural lights. So the insects are adjusting to this, and so are we. So if you have lights around your house, if you don't need them, turn them off at night. Use motion sensors where you need to have some safety or whatever, but just keeping lights on forever is just not the way we need to go these days. So when we go out in the field, it's just really a good thing. I have several of these portable setups that we're able to go out and explore new areas, and using battery packs and whatnot, we can really do a pretty interesting job of finding moths in various landscapes. So I mentioned baiting for moths, and baiting for moths is really about fermented sugars, which are very attractive to many moths. And the baiting is usually, for most of us, it contains some fruit. I use bananas a lot, or any kind of these other, um, fruits that you can put in. And then I put a little bit of, uh, of fermented beer or some other liquid like that, and some brown sugar or cane sugar, and I grind it up in a blender, and I let it sit for a few days. And the more it ferments and the more it starts to smell, the better the moths like it. And you see this young woman on the right is applying the bait to a tree. I usually try to do that at about eye level, so that when the moths come, you can see them. And I try not to make it very big. So the patch is only like a 12-inch square. And the big trick is not to let the dripping bait go down the trunk, because if it goes down the trunk in a runny, the ants will find it and totally obliterate the whole patch, and it'll be not attractive to the moths. So that's one rule of thumb. So the consistency of your bait needs to be somewhat like wallpaper paste. It's the best. On the very top, you see it's a cotton cord, and what some people do is to take this cord, take a 3 4 3 foot piece of cord, soak it in wine for a couple of days, and then just loop that cord over a tree branch. And lo and behold, the moths will find it. So that's just another way of attracting and looking for moths. So this is the sample. Um, all of these little brown guys are overwintering moths. These guys are able to they overwinter as adults, and any day that's above 40 degrees or so, they'll come out. And when you're baiting in the late season, um, we usually do this like right before dusk, and usually like within the first hour after dusk, these guys will be out feeding and looking for sugars. During the winter, what these guys are really looking for is like after an ice storm or after another event where a lot of tree branches are broken, the sap from the different trees, particularly maples and birches, have a lot of sugars in them, and those bleeding um, um, branch breaks or whatever are a good source of sugars for these overwintering moths. So it's just a matter of survival skills for the year round. So these will overwinter as adults. Here's a picture of a green arches on the bait, and again, it's just really cool to see these different things. And if we didn't use bait, some moths will come to the lights and some will come to the baits, and sometimes there's quite a difference in what you'll find at either site. So one of my friends from Florida, this is pretty common in the South, where you just take an onion bag and you fill it full of fruit, and you let the nature take its course and let it kind of get more and more fermented and rotten, and they're very very much attractive to moths. And again, I see this a lot more in the South than we do up here in the Northeast, but it works here too. So when is a moth not looking like a moth? So here's a couple of really interesting insects. These are moths. These are not bees or wasps or anything. Um, this one particularly on the top right. This is the hornet clearwing. There's a couple of species. This is a totally harmless insect. It has no stinger. It has um, no biting mouth parts. It actually, ingests through a straw basically. And again, totally harmless, but it's enough of a coloration that it keeps some of the birds away or other predators that think it may be more harmful. Um, the top left is a very common visitor to our lights. This is the maple calispora moth. And again, it doesn't look anything like most of us think of moths. And on the bottom, we have the peachtree borer. So these are pretty interesting things. And they don't, except for the maple calispora, they don't generally come to lights. Um, how we deal with these and find these things is to actually use uh, lures. And these are pheromone lures. And pheromones are the chemicals that attract um, uh, male moths to female moths. And so I use a trap like on the left with this little scent lure in the trap, and they'll just show up, and I have to do it every day. If you leave them in there, they don't survive well if you leave them out. But I empty it every day, and look for different species of borers. So that's a pretty cool group of insects, and one that I really look forward to every year. And again, we'll talk a bit more about plantings as we go, but things like buttonbush and cardinal flowers and things are all native plants, and we're really trying to get everybody to get their heads around this whole idea of native plants because of the different insects and other species that are really uh, tied to the development of these native plants with these native insects, and they have a symbiotic relationship. A lot of these plants need pollinators to reproduce, and many of the insects need the pollen and the nectar of these plants to for them to reproduce. So it's a symbiotic relationship. The one thing we don't talk about a lot when we talk about pollinator gardens and all those other things that we do quite often in working with our yards is how many of the tree and and shrub species are really important for our different lepidopter species. So things like Virginia creeper and Concord grapes are two great vines that we find native around here and grow quite well. Um, Things like sugar maple and oaks. Oaks probably have more insects than any other tree species or any other plant that we have in the Northeast. So having these big trees, you got to find a place in the yard to have a couple of those around just so we can get a good variety. So I mentioned maple trees. Here's an insect that it's a silk moth. That's a rosy maple moth. Um, it's just a lovely moth, and it's actually very common. I have a lot of maple trees in my yard, and I get these by the dozens coming down to the light. So a little more specific to species is the primrose moth, and that's one of the flower moths, and it actually feeds on primrose. And quite often, you'll be able to find these adult moths during the day in the flower, and they're nice rosy caterpillars you see here are pretty nice to find also. But again, these are very specific to individual species of plant. So the more plants, native plants you have in your garden, the more variety of insects you might attract. So in the Northeast, we're pretty lucky to have actually some field guides for the area. The problem though, is that most of these go out of print pretty quickly. So you really need to look on used bookstores to actually find them. The Peterston Field Guide to the Moths by Seabrook Lucky was the first in this series that she did, and she actually came up to Massachusetts and we spent some time out mothing, and it was pretty lot of fun. But now she's done the Southeast, and she's just done one now for the West Coast. So these guides are becoming more available in different parts of the country. But if you're in an area, if you find them, you really need to pick them up quickly before they go out of print, because they only usually do one or two printings in several of these things. The Caterpillars of the East by Dave Wagner is also a great resource and a good book to use when you're trying to figure out what you're looking at. So in studying moths, really a camera, whether it be a point and shoot camera or your phone and a laptop, are probably the real equipment these days that most of us that look at Lepidoptera and other insects really rely upon. So we'll go into that a little bit. But you can get cameras today and even phones today take absolutely great pictures. And most of the pictures that you'll see through the rest of the program that I've taken were all done with a camera that's on the left. That I've had it a long time, and I have trouble trying to keep batteries in it. And but it's a great little camera, and it has a very good macro focus. So it's able to really take pictures of things that 10 or 15 years ago we probably wouldn't have been able to take pictures of. So this is I'm naturalist. This is I put all of my moths that I find in iNaturalist. Um, they shows here that I've got, like 967 species. And this is in my yard up here in Athol, which is in central Mass. And we're finding more all the time. So since this one, there's been another species from the yard, and we'll talk about that after. But I find iNaturalist is a very useful tool because it'll give you ideas. If you take the photograph and you submit it to iNaturalist, it'll give you a good idea of what family you're in. Like with all these AI-driven identification tools, you really got to kind of take a grain of salt with whatever they're suggesting. I do that, and then I go and research that suggestion deeper using several other websites and some of my other material. But it gives you a great place to start. And with iNaturalist, if you're not familiar with it, if you make a suggestion of an ID, um, other members of the iNaturalist team will actually help you identify and give you suggestions for IDs that they do not agree with. So this is not to say, oh, you're all wrong. It's just a way to help each other to bear down and get into the species that we're working with. And the other thing that you need to know also that there are several species, a number of species, that really can't be determined to species level identification because of look-alike species, and some actually need to be dissected and having the sexual parts analyzed to get you to a specific species. So oftentimes we just bring it down to the genus level, and that's fine. Oftentimes it'll be called like the 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 black darter or the black um, moth complex. So we get it as close as we can to the species, but don't be alarmed that it's not like bird watching. We can't get to every species individually identified. Sometimes the family, sometimes the genus is all we can do. So Massachusetts, particularly, we're very fortunate to have the Mass Moth website. Um, um, Steve Whitebread is the curator of this website. Um, you can see this is one of my moths up here in the top left. Um, but but he's tracked all the moths in Massachusetts, and you can get into a little bit of uh, of distribution and where they are in the state. And it's just a good guide, and it allows us to have a little bit more information about what specifically is happening in Massachusetts. The other websites that I use a lot are the Bug Guide and the Moth Photographers Group. Both of those are easily found on the web and give you good information. And again, I go oftentimes to iNaturalist first. I get an idea which way I'm headed, and then go to these other resources to kind of narrow down my species identification. And this is just good stuff to be doing with everybody in your family in your neighborhood. There's just a lot of fun getting out there in the night and looking for weird stuff. And the other thing about this is that a lot of these moths are downright beautiful. I mean, this is again a pretty one of the emeralds. This one is the wavy lined emerald. There's probably a half a dozen species of these beautiful small green moths that we like to see, and they're just great. So we're going to talk about a little bit some of the different groups, just to give you an idea of the diversity of moths that you might find. And again, these were all taken at in my yard. Um, so we'll start. So the geometers are the biggest, very large group of moths, and just when you think you start to get a good idea of what's happening, moths have different um, variations in their scales. This one is a oak beauty, and if you look at the top left as what they normally look like, but you wind up with different ones that are actually melanic and are actually all black. So you really need to be looking at the shape and the whole posture of the moth to help you discern that difference. Here's a whole group that's really fun. These are the haploas, and again, they're very striking. The one on the bottom left here, the haploa climbing, is probably the most common. It's also a day flying moth. So quite often we find those out when we're out looking for birds or butterflies. We'll find them. And this one was a little bit of a surprise to me. Um, this this little beast showed up at my light one night, and I was thinking it was you know one of the tiger moths, but it just looked a little different. Several of the tiger moths do have a little bit of orange on the face, but when I was able to actually um, poke it with my finger, it turned out to be quite spectacular. And this is a salt marsh moth, and what it was doing up in my area, which is as far from salt as you can find. I just don't know, but it is here, and it is here, and it's a pretty spectacular large moth, and it is feeds on baptisia and different cabbage things. So again, it's not real common across inland Mass, but I've also had it out in Martha's Vineyard and in other searches. So I mean, some of these other moths are just fun to find. This is a raspberry pyrusta, and again, I get this several times during the summer, and there's a couple other pyrustas that I see, and they're just all really cool and fun to see. So then we go into a little bit even more depth, and these are micro moths, and actually, they can be only a few centimeters long. Um, these are pretty tiny, um, and the top left one is the Eleanthus webworm moth. Um, Again, it's just a beautiful, striking pattern. Um, the Eleanthus, the tree of heaven, is it in an induced species, and this is an induced moth. This came with the plant. It's not native to our country. Um, and then these other ones are the Suzuki chromolactis and the yellow nutsedge are again just very intricate, beautiful little moths that you really need a very close focusing camera to get pictures of these guys. They're really quite tiny. So some of the ones that are a little bit bigger. This is a beautiful wood nymph, and again, it's it really looks a lot like a bird dropping, which is another uh, factor for a lot of different moths that, in butterflies that look like bird poop. And if you look like poop enough, it really you're not that edible. So many different moths have different mechanisms to try to hide in plain sight and become unattractive as a food source. And again, getting out in the night with a group of folks is really, part of the fun of all this, and doing this with a group of friends is part of the fun of it all. You'll find all different types of camera equipment, and I tend to be a little bit on the simple side when it comes to photography. But Tom Murray in the picture here is, got thousands of photographs on Moth Photographers Group and Bug Guide and such. And it's great to have these other entomologists show up at your parties to help you identify things. And that's just the back patio for the mothball. Again, it's a very casual, fun evening. We eat a lot, have a lot of fun, and look at just all kinds of different insects, not just moths, but beetles and fireflies and spiders and everything else that we can find. There's me with my little camera. I find that little camera to still be. I've tried newer models that they don't work as well as this older one, so they shouldn't improve things beyond their usefulness. So just so that you think you've been doing stuff. I've been at this location for about 18 years and doing moths that whole time, and yet new species of moths can show up. This one was found by Jen Foreman North back this year during the mothball, and it's a greater idiom moth. And again, this is the first state record for this moth. So that's really interesting to me. And again, having a bunch of people all taking photographs and documenting these things really helps us to make a pretty complete picture of the moth fauna here that I have in the yard. Again, doing this with the group is really kind of a lot of the fun part of it. And I've never had a a moth event where people didn't show up. So the biggest problem though with moth events is people tend to go home too early. Moths, for the most part, really take about an hour after sunset to get rolling around. And that first hour around sunset is when all the biting insects are out there. So I tend to usually, when I do a moth event, I'll actually get things set up and then do an indoor program for an hour or so to let people um, get acclimated to what we're going to be looking at, and also allowing the night to progress enough so that the biting insects start to wane and the moths get a little bit more prolific. And really, when I look at what I do at my house for the mothball, quite often from the prime time for mothing is like 10 o'clock in the evening to around 2 in the morning. And even 3 or 4 in the morning is still getting good stuff. But and you get different things as the night progresses. So as the longer you stay out, the more different species you may come across. So a lot of the things we look at too is not just moths, but here's a crab spider that picked up a moth on this is a buddleia. Uh, Buddleia is not one of the things we recommend planting. This one happened to be a wedding gift, and it's the only buddleia that survived. But it does many species like the nectar on buddleia, and again, um, the crab spider is taking advantage of that. So every year we do a mothball, and it kicks off National Moth Week. And um, back, I used to do my mothballs in June, and then I'm actually on the advisory committee for National Moth Week. And when we got that going, I moved my mothball to July, which actually gave me a whole different uh, regimen of moths that I was able to identify with my group, and it's really been kind of fun. So so I've done mothballs in June and mothballs in July. I may try to do an August one of these days too, just to see what's happening in the later part of summer. But everybody can participate in National Moth Week all across uh, actually the world these days. There are a lot of different moth events. And if you go to National Moth Week, you'll be able to sign up and find out where mothing events are happening near you. And you can even have your own in that week. So, and again, National Moth Week uses iNaturalist to help consolidate all the information and really get it rolling. So I just want to give a special thanks to all the people that really helped um, over the years doing this and identifying all the moths and providing photographs and really helping to advance this whole idea of mothing in Massachusetts. So with that, I'll leave you with this plume moth, which actually is what I was on a butterfly field trip out near the Wachusett Reservoir, and it was a kind of a misty, cloudy day, and this is the only lepidoptera I saw that day, and this is on a dogbane blossom, so you can see how big that is, and it really it's just an intricate, beautiful little moth uh, that's there. So with that, I'll be able to take any questions for folks.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Dave. There's so many moths I want to try to see. Thank you so much. Now, that screen for the mothball, are we supposed to take that as an invitation or should
Oh,
we say,
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, last year we had about 70 people show up. So we're not afraid to have some help. Uh,
Okay, that's awesome. It would be really fun to come and see how you do it and get even more advice. We have questions from the audience.
sure.
I have a couple questions. So the when you talked about the difference between moths and butterflies
Yeah.
and whether they have the clubbed antennae or the non-club, do they function differently or are they just evolutionary divergences?
Maybe a little of both. The the feathered ones of moths have very specific functions. I think the thread-like antenna on the moth and the clubbed antenna on the butterfly is probably a very similar usefulness. For detecting. Again, it's a sensory receptor. So they're taking in all the different climatic things between dew and humidity and light and everything else is coming from their antennas. So those are probably pretty similar, but those feathered ones are very specific to um, uh, you know uh, sensing the pheromones that are being transmitted by the males.
Okay, that's neat. When I was looking at your pictures, I kept trying to see which were night, but looking at the backgrounds, whether there was a cloth behind them or a leaf, whether they were day moths or night moths. And is there, I mean, do the night moths tend to be more drab because you can't see them as well, or can you not make generalizations like that?
Yeah, that's not an easy generalization. Um, the different backgrounds. When I have my light set up, I have the light, and then like behind the mercury vapor, I have a pillowcase size sheet behind it, and that's helps to amplify the light going out into the yard. But the rest of the wall of that barn is just barn board, and that makes for a much better picture. So it's kind of when you're actually looking at kind of like a grayscale kind of a background that allows you to take good color photographs with the barn board background. It's much nicer than on the white of the sheet. Now, the other thing about the sheets that I use, they're actually um, um, they're ripstop cloth, and they have a 0.6 millimeter square. And so when I take pictures on the cloth of the smaller butterfly moths, I can actually measure them from from the photograph. So that is just, I actually emailed the manufacturer and said, why can't you make it 0.5 instead of 0.6? But they said that's not what they're doing. But anyway, at least I tried.
That is so neat. That's a really great specific point. I don't know if I want to get, okay, we'll go into it. We have some very specific questions about
Sure.
your equipment, and I was going to wait, but since we got to the point six, we'll do those too. We have one question from a real nature lover here and an expert, and says, could you please tell us what the camera you use is again? Preparing my wish list for Santa.
Yeah, that's a good question, and not one that like I say, my old camera is a Panasonic. Um, you know, it's just a point and shoot. It's got a 3x macro lens on it, so and that's the lens that I usually use to do mods. I haven't found a good modern one. I mean, that one I've had for 15 or more years, and I've tried a newer model that didn't work as well. So I'm still experimenting, trying to find a good macro camera that works well. A lot of my friends are using their iPhones to take the pictures, and they seem to be working well. Um, and all of these things, we gotta. You're working with a bunch of different light, so I've seen tons of different ways that people have diffusers for their flash, so that when they take a flash picture, it doesn't blow out the color of the moth you're taking a picture of. So sometimes the flashes are too bright, and I use a flashlight to shine on the moth as I take the picture, to get to balance out the lighting. So that's just a matter of experimentation and using your own equipment. So, um, but yeah, so my experience has been you don't need a real extravagant camera. You just need one that'll actually do a macro zoom, like a 3x macro zoom would be ideal.
Okay, we have one of our attendees says that an Olympus TG series is a point and shoot and is supposed to be good for macro.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm writing it down.
Okay. We have the notes. We can share them with you later. And we have one more before we get back to some of the nature questions. Oh, this is nature too. Would you be a bit more specific about black lights for attracting moths, the voltages and the other specifications for an amateur mother?
Yeah,
I've
okay.
looked online and would like a specific formula for lights that are not too expensive.
Yeah, so the black lights you're looking for are the ones that you would use for kids that have day glow posters. You know, there are some black lights that are not UV rated, so it's like a black blue bulb or something. It's a little bit different, but you want a UV bulb, and that again, um, I found them at all the big box stores have them, and oftentimes you'll find them in the same area. You're going to find the um uh the day glow colors and paints and all that stuff. So that's the one way to find them. But that's what you're looking for is the ones that's going to react with the day glow paints or whatever. Those are the ones that are going to do the best, and they're relatively cheap. 10, $15, you can get yourself into one of those. So they're pretty cheap. When you get up into the mercury vapor, um, that's not as easily findable these days. And that's why people are going to these new LED ones, because of the mercury vapor lights are, well, they're pretty harsh in your eyes to boot. And mercury is not a wonderful thing in the planet. So again, I've had this bulb, knock on wood, for 15 years or so, and I have a spare, but they're harder to come by. So some of these newer lights are a lot of people are experimenting with wavelengths of light and whatnot, and this is where they're headed. It seems is in these new LED lights. They're right now quite pricey. That pair of lights that I showed for the LEDs is about $200.
Whoa.
You know, but for me, I'll buy
Those of us just starting out, maybe
it.
start at the low.
Yeah.
So you said you've been observing these for a long time, the moths. Have you noticed any changes in the timing over the years? Like, are they coming earlier? Are they, as the plant timing changes, does their arrival change?
I think a lot of that, I'm seeing species that are more southern,
Okay.
that are showing up. But I've also seen, when I first was doing this, and really Facebook was really helpful in doing this because I was communicating um, with moth people up and down the East Coast, and it would be fun to have people in Carolinas or Georgia or something seeing species, and then 2 weeks later I'd see them. So it was good to kind of
Oh,
see how that kind of went. And I have noticed that we're getting on some years, I'm getting some really early specimens of some of these ones that are emerging just a little earlier than they used to, and I have seen some of that. Um, I have seen a pretty large um, shortage of the abundance of moths at the light. When I was doing this 15 years ago, I'd have several hundred moths at the light at any given time, and now it's more. I'm probably getting maybe a third of that on a good night. So part of that could be, as Dr. Owen was saying, that the moths themselves are becoming less oriented to these specific lights, which is going to be tough for people like me that are trying to document what's going on. But the other things that are going on for all of us are, we're filling our planet with chemicals. We're doing all these other weird stuff and putting lights on every street light and gas station and everything. And, there's just a lot we're doing. And all these invasive plants that we've really worked on and stuff. I mean, we really got to get back to the basics of native plants, um, you know, just good husbandry all around, you know, don't be spraying a lot of pesticides, just be a better citizen,
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
you know.
Uh, We have a question here about the lights,
Mhm.
both those that are used for studies and those that are just, as you say, out in our society. And do artificial lights cause exhaustion in moths or otherwise reduce their health?
There's a lot of discussion about it. I do think that the general amount of ambient light that's out there now is causing good disruption in some of their behavior. And as Dr. Owen was pointing out, that there's actually some moths that are actually, not using light as they used to. So whenever you have lights that aren't needed, it's best just to turn them off. Again, we suggest that you use motion sensors on lights where you want to have safety. I know myself that if you have a light that comes on with movement, you're more apt to look and see what's going on versus something that stays on all the time. So it's just there's a lot of good reasons to use motion sensors, and generally to lessen your photo output of your property. So I mean, it's just good practice.
Dr. Owens did a webinar for us. She didn't have this, she hadn't yet gotten to this about the evolution that seems to be taking place.
Yeah,
But when the day after, for those of you who don't come to us all the time, I usually send a follow-up letter and I will send a link to Dr. Owens' webinar because she talks about very specific things we can do to try to reduce our output around our own
yeah,
properties.
yeah,
It was really neat to see those micro moths. Now, the first one that you indicated to us, that you said was not a native moth, and
yes.
you showed three of them. Do you know whether the other two were native or not?
Yeah, I think the other two were the Elalanthus weberum. That's the tree of heaven, is the host plant for that, which is one of those species we tell people not to plant. It's also a great host for the spotted lanternfly, so we don't want to be promoting that either. But you have to admit that even being an invasive tree with an invasive moth, at least it's a pretty moth anyway.
Yeah,
Um,
it is a pretty moth.
and and I don't think that the webworm moth is a invasive or problematic to other moth species. It's just the tree itself that we don't like.
Okay. And the percentage of the moths you showed us, are most of them native? Are they split pretty much between native and exotic?
I'd say 95% are native. So most of them are native. Um, and again, it's as you start doing this, you'll see from like early May right through the summer into the fall, there's a succession of different species that emerge at different times during the summer. And actually, we have different moths that are available at different times during the night. I have some moth species that don't show up till 2 in the morning, you know, so so it's just a difference in their behaviors and their life cycles and all this stuff. So it really is you have to look at it a lot of different times a day, a lot of different times of the year, and in different weather conditions. The best time to look at Mars is on a cloudy, warm, kind of misty night where you don't have the moon and other things and the stars interfering with your attractant light. So it works a little bit better if you don't have the competition of other lights.
Oh, fascinating. Do you serve coffee at the mothball? Because wow, that's really dedication to keep up that late. We have more questions about the invasive moths,
Hmm.
and like the spongy moth.
Yeah.
I presume you observe. You don't do anything about them, because one of our questions is, should one destroy them?
Yeah, and anytime I find spongy moth egg masses on any of my trees, I will disrupt those egg masses. That seems to be the best way. The female spongy moth does not fly, So she's sitting there, um, on the trunk of the tree, attracting the male to her, and then she just goes and lays these strings of eggs along the bark of the tree, and it's probably futile, but if I find them, I usually try to disrupt them.
Okay, we have a question as well about the brown tail moth.
Yeah, yeah, which is, um, yeah, the brown tail and brown tip. There's two, but anyway, yeah, that's the one that's along the coast, and it's an invasive moth. Um, I I think the brown tail is the one that actually has the fine hairs that are actually very um, problematic if you get in contact with them, and it's probably the only moth that's actually killed a researcher because they get into your lungs and those little fine hairs are really very very problematic. So so
Wow.
anyway, so there's some very problematic moths that are out there, but they're very rare and not widespread whatsoever. So they're those are probably now just on the extreme parts of the coast, and some of the biocontrols that have been laid out for them. There's a fly, I think it's Compsolura. It's one of those. But anyway, there's a couple of things that have been released to help control those populations.
Oh, fascinating. Uh, where do I go next? Oh, I guess I'll go with this one before we leave and go to um, with the invasive moths. Um, no, I'm going to leave that. I'm going to go to variations. No, sorry, my brain was wandering ahead of itself. You showed us how two moths that were very similar in their coloring, and you said
Yeah,
just when you've learned how to identify it, you see this and you really can't identify it as well. Are there regional variations in coloring, or are they just they can all be in the same area and it's sort of happenstance?
yeah. If you look back in time, I don't know, when I was in school, we learned about the peppered moth in Europe that, they said was by the Industrial Revolution, basically, that they had that melanic form, with
Yeah,
dark peppered moths and light ones. Um, uh, Ted Sargent, who's was a UMass professor, did a lot of research on that melanism in moths, and actually, it's a relatively common thing. And he really disputed the whole industrial melanism, story, because he was in Leverett, which doesn't have any industry at all, and he had a pretty good number of these dark forms. So I think it's a fairly normal thing in nature. We see that, and I've seen melanic chipmunks. I've seen, we have a lot of different other species that have
yeah,
either leucistic or melanic forms, and I think insects aren't any different. And
yep.
but that's
Bird.
kind of yeah.
Now, we have a double question, and the first is, what was the name of the overwintering moths in the New England area?
Okay, there's a whole bunch. Um, there's I'm going to use my brain here for a second. Um, um, there's a whole group called the Sallows, Sallows, and they're basically nondescript little brown moths that are out there overwintering. But we have several things that overwinter. I mean, even butterflies like that morning cloak butterfly overwinters as an adult, and some of the other ones, the question mark and some of these other moths, butterflies of that group are overwinter. And so there's quite a few that'll be there as adults, and days that are over 40 or 50 degrees, some of them will start to fly. Most insects need to have almost 60 degrees for their wings to work.
Wow.
So they need to warm up somehow. And when you look at some of these different moths and butterflies, they'll have um, the red spotted purple white admiral. The white admirals in the north have a white stripe on their wing that actually allows them to point the sun's rays at the body, so they can warm themselves up before the air temperature actually gets to the right temperature. So they're able to fly longer during the day on these cold mornings and stuff. So lots of adaptations for the different ways that they have to live their lives.
Nature's amazing. They live under bark? Do they live in leaf litter? Where the ones that overwinter as adults, where do they hang out?
Yeah, it's a good question. And under bark is certainly one, in stone walls or other things, in tree crevices, inside the cavities in trees, where they can get out of the weather and out of the wind. So, and away from predators. That's the other big thing. Chickadees and stuff, that's what they're looking for all winter. Those little, between the moths and the eggs and the caterpillars that might be out there, that's what they're searching for. And again, that's what moths and stuff is so important to us because they're the engine that runs the rest of the vertebrate world.
Yeah. And the ones that are flying around are the winter moths. Do I remember that the female winter moth also doesn't fly? Am I making that up?
I don't remember.
Okay.
That's an introduced species again. We have the Bruce spanworm is the one that's a native here, and it doesn't do anywhere near the damage that the winter moth does, and they do have a good uh, fly that's actually now helping to control winter moth in the southeast, particularly. So they're working on it. But once you've established an invasive species, it's very difficult to unring the bell. So once they're here, it's very difficult to get rid of them. And we've never done enough to screen the packages from overseas and pallets and other things that I mean, commerce doesn't want to pay for the extra diligence, but we pay a lot when we don't do the diligence.
Yeah.
So the prevention's a lot better than the cure.
We have another very specific, um, and it is, does the presence of hooks that connect the fore and hind wings differentiate moths and butterflies? I've read it somewhere, but is that also a human construct?
I know they exist, and I'm not sure which. I'm not sure for the separation about whether or not. I know that occurs in moths. I'm not sure if they occur in butterflies as much. Um, But again, it's the same thing we look at like with owls and stuff. It makes their wings quieter. So I would think, so that's part of what those hooks actually do for the wing. So it makes them more stealthy.
That is neat. And as that person says, thank you for this wonderful presentation. And we have a whole list of comments about it being delightful and how colorful the moths are. And it was just absolutely wonderful. And Dave, you may be surprised how many of us show up at the mothball this summer. We will keep people informed. Uh,
Yeah.
Thank you very much. This was just wonderful. And thank you, everyone, for being here. Most of all, thank you, Dave. This was amazing. And good night, everyone.